Okay, so now we're in section 3, and section 3 begins on your worksheet here. There are 3 tasks to complete. One of those includes a timeline. Texas. There was a reason many Americans felt that Texas was so valuable. Much of this region was well suited for growing cotton, the South's most valuable cash crop. So many Southerners hoped that one day Texas would become part of the United States. Americans come to Texas. The story of Texas begins with Moses Austin. Austin was a banker and a business owner who dreamed of starting a U.S. colony in Spanish Texas. In 1821, Spanish officials granted Austin a huge piece of land. Austin died that same year, so his son Stephen took over his father's dream. Stephen F. Austin arrived in Texas just as Mexico declared its independence from Spain and took control of Texas. Mexican officials agreed to let Austin start his colony under certain conditions. He had to use only moral and hardworking settlers. The settlers had to promise to become Mexican citizens and to join the Catholic Church. Austin agreed to Mexico's terms. By 1827, he had attracted 297 families. Soon, they were known as the Old 300 to Texas. Rising tensions. The success of Austin's colony started a rush of settlers to Texas. By 1830, there were about 25,000 Americans in Texas, compared to 4,000 Tejanos. Tejanos were Texans of Mexican descent. Tensions between the two groups soon arose. The Americans had several complaints. They were used to governing themselves, and they resented taking orders from Mexican officials. They were unhappy that all official documents had to be in Spanish. Most of them were unwilling to learn the language. Many were also slaveholders. They were upset when Mexico outlawed slavery in 1829. The Tejanos had their own complaints. They were unhappy that many American settlers had come to Texas without Mexico's permission. Worse, most of these new immigrants showed little respect for Mexican culture, and they had no intention of becoming citizens. The Mexican government responded by closing Texas to further U.S. immigration. Then they sent troops to Texas to enforce the immigration laws. So this section right here that I have just read from, Rising Tensions, is where you will find the answer to number 3, or to section 3, question 1. List 2 complaints of American settlers in Texas in 1830. Then list 2 complaints of Tejanos in 1830. So pause so that you can answer the question. Now that you've answered question 1, we're going to move on to the timeline. Now, before we read this section over here, let's look at the directions for the timeline so that we know exactly what's expected of us while we're reading. So question 2, the timeline. Complete the timeline with important events that led Texas to win its independence. Write a 1 or 2 sentence summary next to each date. Use all of the words in the word bank somewhere on the timeline. And then it says also create illustrations for 2 of the events, but if you notice, I have marked that out. You do not have to do that. So you need to use this word bank, but that is not the only thing that will go in each of these boxes. What you will do is write a 1 or 2 sentence summary. So when we get to the Alamo, wherever you decide to put that, you need to summarize what this article over in here says about the Alamo. The Texans rebel. Americans in Texas resented these actions. A group led by a lawyer named William Travis began calling for revolution. Another group was led by Stephen F. Austin. He asked the Mexican government to reopen Texas to immigration. They also wanted to make it a separate Mexican state so that Texans could run their own affairs. In 1833, Austin traveled to Mexico and presented the Texans' demands to the new head of the Mexican government, General Antonio Lopez de Santa Anna. The general was a power-hungry dictator. He once boasted, "If I were God, I would wish to be more." Rather than bargain with Austin, Santa Anna had him arrested and jailed for promoting rebellion. Austin was released in 1835, and the Texans rose up in revolt. Determined to crush the rebels, Santa Anna marched north with some 6,000 troops. President of the new government, that would be Santa Anna. And then we have Austin, who, if you look right here, says a group led by a lawyer named William Travis began calling for revolution. Another group was led by Stephen Austin, and this is what he wanted. And then let's see, Santa Anna again, marching north with troops. That might be important to put in there. The Tejanos are in here. The Tejanos, or Tejanos. Tejanos were Texans of Mexican descent. The Tejanos had complaints that the people were there illegally, didn't show respect for the culture, and had no intention of becoming citizens. And then the Mexican government responded, and the way immigration is used was they closed Texas to immigration and sent troops to enforce those laws. Some of our important dates here are 1829. I'm going to do those in different colors. And we've got 1830. And then the next date we're looking for is 1833. Then we have 1835. And I believe that's as far as we've gotten with our text right there so far. So right now, press pause, and as you see, you can find the different areas of information have been highlighted along with the dates for you to be able to fill in on the timeline. So you should be able to get to 35. Okay? So 1, 2, 3, 4 of these boxes should be used along with several of these different terminologies. So press pause and get that done real quick. The Alamo. In late February 1836, a large part of Santa Anna's army reached San Antonio, Texas. About 180 Texan volunteers, including 8 Tejanos, defended the town. The Texans had taken over an old mission known as the Alamo. Among them was Davy Crockett, the famous frontiersman and former congressman from Tennessee. Sharing command with William Travis was James Bowie. Bowie was well-known Texas freedom fighter. So I'm going to highlight some important information right here. San Antonio, Texas is where 180 Texan volunteers plus 8 Tejanos defended the town and took over a Spanish mission, which was a place where they had tried to convert natives to Christianity, known as the Alamo. Okay, so that is what happened, and that happened in February of 1836. And some of your notable names among there are going to be Davy Crockett, William Travis, and I don't see that right here other than the Alamo, which we have highlighted. The Alamo's defenders watched as General Santa Anna raised a black flag. The black flag meant expect no mercy. The general demanded that the Texans surrender. Travis answered with a cannon shot. Slowly, Santa Anna's troops began to surround the Alamo. The Texans were vastly outnumbered, but only one man fled. Travis, who was an American, a Texan, sent messengers to other towns in Texas to plead for help. He vowed not to abandon the Alamo, proclaiming victory or death, and help never came. For 12 days, the Mexicans pounded the Alamo with cannonballs. On March 6th, Santa Anna ordered his troops to storm the fort. Desperately, the Texans tried to fight off the attackers with rifle fire. So we've got Santa Anna ordering them to storm the fort, which was the Alamo, and that was on March 6th. This is February 1836, so this is going to be the same year, 1836. For 90 minutes, the battle raged, and then it was all over. Every one of the Alamo's defenders was dead by the day's end. Those who had survived the battle were executed on the spot by Santa Anna's order. That made people very upset. Santa Anna described the fight for the Alamo as but a small affair. His decision to kill every man at the Alamo filled Texans with rage. Texas wins its independence. Sam Houston, the commander of the Texas Revolutionary Army, understood Texans' rage. But as Santa Anna pushed on, Houston's only hope was to retreat eastward. He lured Santa Anna deeper into Texas. Austin hoped to make it more difficult for the general to supply his army and maintain his battle readiness. Although Houston's strategy was unpopular, it worked well. In April, and this is still of 1836, in April, still of 1836, Santa Anna caught up with Houston near the San Joaquino River. The general kept his troops awake all night because he expected the Texans to attack at dawn, but no attack came. So the weary Mexicans relaxed, and Santa Anna went to his tent to take a nap. Late that afternoon, Houston's troops staged a surprise attack. Yelling, "Remember the Alamo!" the Texans overran the Mexican camp. This prompted Santa Anna to flee, and he was captured the next day. In exchange for his freedom, he ordered all of his remaining troops out of Texas. The Texas War for Independence had been won, but Mexico did not fully accept the loss of the territory. To annex Texas or not? The Republic of Texas earned the nickname the Lone Star Republic because of the use of a single star on its flag. Most Texans were Americans who wanted Texas to become part of the United States. So this is a time period where Texas was its own country for about 10 years. Despite their wishes, Texas remained independent for over 10 years, and people were divided as to whether or not to annex Texas. Southerners were eager to add another slave state, but Northerners opposed slavery and wanted to keep Texas out. Others feared that annexation would lead to war with Mexico. The 1844 presidential campaign was influenced by the question of whether to expand U.S. territory. One candidate, Henry Clay, warned annexation and war with Mexico are identical. His opponent, James K. Polk, was a strong believer in manifest destiny, and he was eager to acquire Texas. After Polk was elected, Congress voted to annex Texas. In 1845, Texas was admitted as the 28th state. Okay, so now you should be able to finish these last three and move on to question 3. What happened to Texas in 1845? Give one argument against and one argument in favor of this decision. So what happened in 1845? Well, I've highlighted 1845 for you, and then I'll highlight 1844, and it looks like previously or prior to that we were still looking in the 1836 range. So from 1836 to 1845, you're going to be looking in this particular section here. Okay, so your answer to this bottom box here is over here in this purple. All right, so stop the video and answer, please, the timeline and question 3, and then you can play the next video for section 4, and I believe that After that, we will be done with the reading.